At 73, Maribel Ackerman still believed that a family was the one place a person never had to knock. She had believed it for 41 years, through every winter on Ohio Street, through every casserole carried to a sick neighbor, and every account balanced by hand at her own kitchen table. A door, she had always thought, was just a thing that opened. Then her oldest son stood up at her birthday dinner, raised his glass, and slid a nursing home brochure across the cake. Before the maples on Ohio Street dropped their last leaf, every name at that birthday table would learn what their welcome was truly worth, and the one they shut out would hold the only key left. But what her children did not know was that their mother had spent 40 years writing everything down, every dollar, every promise. In little notebooks they liked to laugh about, and in a dented tin on the kitchen shelf, behind the recipe cards, there was something none of them had ever been allowed to touch. Ohio Street ran narrow and quiet down toward the old Penobscot riverfront, a row of two-story houses that had watched the mills come and the mills go. The Ackerman place was the one with the porch light that never went off. Maribel had kept it burning for 40 years, so that anyone walking home in the Bangor cold would know which door to try. Russell Ackerman had given her those years and most of his back, 31 of them at the paper mill upriver, until the cough and a buyout sent him home for good. He was 75 now. He still rose at 5 out of habit, still kept his boots lined up by the door, still called her Mibby when no one was around to hear it. They did not have much. They had never needed much. What they did have, Maribel had written down, 40 years of ledgers, little spiral notebooks, one for each year, lined up in the cabinet beside the stove. Every grocery receipt, every furnace repair, every $20 bill she ever pressed into a grandchild's palm. She had been a seamstress and then a bookkeeper, and numbers were the one language her in-laws had never managed to take away from her. Once, years back, the power company billed them twice for the same December. Maribel had it in her own hand, the date, the check number, the meter reading. They refunded $41 and mailed an apology. She kept the apology. She wrote it all down, the way she wrote everything down. Her children found the notebooks hilarious. Mom and her little books, Dale liked to say, like the bank's ever going to call and ask. She let them laugh. She kept writing. On the shelf above the stove sat a dented tin recipe box, the green paint worn gray at the corners. The grandchildren had been told gently and only once that the tin was not a toy. Inside were index cards in 3 different hands. Beneath the index cards was something else. Maribel did not talk about that part, and down the hall, past the bathroom, there was a back bedroom she kept locked. She dusted it every Sunday. She changed sheets on a bed that no one slept in. When Sharon asked her once why she bothered, Maribel only said she liked to keep a room ready for a guest. She never said which guest. Father Lindqvist had married Russell and Maribel in the brick church on Cedar Street, back when the pews still filled. He ran the food pantry now. He had a way of telling you nothing at all and somehow handing you the answer anyway. Maribel did not know it yet, but she would be standing in his pantry line within the month, dressed as someone she was not. Russell's mother had not wanted Maribel in the family to begin with. Greta Ackerman had said so plainly at the wedding, loud enough for the front pews to hear. She's not our kind. Maribel was a mill worker's daughter who had sewn her own dress. Greta came from people who summered on the coast and never let you forget the coast was there. For 30 years, the two women circled each other like cold fronts. Then Greta got old, and old has a way of softening what pride kept hard. In her last years, she wrote Maribel letters, a few pages at a time in handwriting that shook more each season. She apologized for things Maribel had long stopped expecting an apology for, and she ended every letter the same strange way. "Kindness answers the door," Greta wrote. "Remember that, Maribel. Kindness always answers the door." Maribel had thought it was just an old woman's saying. She kept the letters in the locked room in a shoebox with a brass house key tied to a frayed blue ribbon. The key did not fit any lock she used. She carried it in her coat pocket anyway. the way some people carry a medal without quite knowing why. The hard part was that Maribel, on the very day Greta called her not our kind, had sworn she would never do that to another living soul. She had promised herself her table would always hold one more chair than it needed. She had broken that promise, not on purpose, but she had watched it happen. Her youngest, Wade, had married a girl named Priya 10 years back. Priya was from away, as they say in Maine, about anyone born past the county line, and her people were from a good deal farther than that. The family was polite to her the way you are polite to a stranger at a bus stop. Brenda corrected her pronunciation. Dale called her Wade's wife for 3 years before he used her name. In 10 years of holidays, Sharon never did learn how Priya took her coffee. And it was Priya who had sat up all night in the emergency room. The winter Russell's chest went tight. While Dale was at a conference he could not miss. Priya, who mailed birthday cards with real handwriting inside. Priya, who, alone in the whole family, had ever asked to see the little notebooks and actually listened while Maribel explained them. Maribel knew exactly what that cold felt like, and she had let it happen anyway at her own table. She told herself she was keeping the peace. The truth was she was tired, and the cold was easier than the fight. That was the regret she carried to her 73rd birthday. They came on the second Sunday of October when the maples on Ohio Street had already begun to let go. Dale brought a bottle of wine that cost more than Maribel spent on groceries in a week and made sure everyone saw the label. Brenda brought a store cake. Sharon brought her opinions. Wade was 3 states south in his truck, hauling lumber to cover a mortgage his brother would have called beneath him. So Priya came alone, with their 2 children and a pie she had baked herself. It was the only homemade thing on the table. She set it down quietly and took the seat at the far end, the one by the drafty window. No one had assigned it to her. No one had needed to. Maribel watched her oldest son work the room. He laughed too loud and checked his phone too often. Twice he stepped out to the porch to take a call, his voice dropping low through the screen door. What Maribel did not know yet was that Dale had refinanced his Colonial off-Broadway twice in 4 years, across the Kanduskieg in the newer part of town, that the last letter from his bank had come printed in red. Her oldest son was not weeks away from comfortable. He was weeks away from losing everything, and he had run the numbers on his mother's house the way he ran the numbers on everything, coldly, and in his own favor. Then the plates were cleared, and he stood and tapped his glass with a fork. To Mom, Dale said, and the table went quiet. 73 years old today, 40 of them in this house. And in all that time, she never once let one of us take care of her. A few soft laughs. Maribel folded her hands in her lap. Well, Dale said, smiling, that ends tonight. He reached into his jacket and laid a glossy brochure on the table, right beside the cake. Riverview Senior Living, it read, over a photograph of strangers playing cards. Best place in the county, Dale said. Meals, nursing, a van for your appointments. They do everything for you. Maribel looked at the brochure. She did not touch it. The house on Ohio Street is an asset, Mom, he went on, gentler now, the way men get gentle once they have already decided. It isn't a shrine. You and Dad would be a lot more comfortable somewhere managed. We had it appraised, he added, $240,000, more if we stage it right. Russell set down his fork. The small sound of it was the loudest thing in the room. You appraised our house, Russell said. I'm being responsible, Dad. Brenda leaned in, bright as the brochure herself. They have a salon, Maribel, and bridge on Thursdays. You'd make friends. She has friends, Russell said. They live on this street. Sharon sighed the sigh of a woman who had rehearsed being reasonable. Mom, think about the stairs. What happens the day Dad falls? You want him lying on that floor for 6 hours? The 2 grandchildren had gone still, the way children go still when the air in a room changes. Priya's little girl was watching her grandmother with big eyes. Dale slid the brochure an inch closer. Just read it, Mom. That's all I'm asking tonight. It was Priya who broke it. quietly, from the far end of the table, the way a person speaks when she is not sure she is allowed to. She doesn't have to decide anything tonight, Priya said. It's her birthday. Maybe we just let it be her birthday. The whole table turned to look at her, like she had knocked over a glass. Stay out of it, Priya, Dale said. Not loud, just final. This is a family matter. And there it was, the whole thing in 4 words. After 10 years, 2 children, and 100 holidays, Priya was still standing on the wrong side of the word family. Maribel watched her daughter-in-law's face close like a door. She wanted to say something. She had wanted to say something for 10 years. Instead, she looked down at her folded hands and she said nothing, and she hated herself for it in the old familiar way. They left before dark, the way people leave when they think they have won something. Dale kissed her cheek at the door and told her to sleep on it. Brenda told her the brochure was hers to keep. Priya was the last one out. She stopped on the porch under the light that never went off and squeezed Maribel's hand once. "Happy birthday, Maribel," she said. "The pie's your recipe. I hope I got it close." Then she gathered her children and walked down Ohio Street toward the bus stop, because the family that had appraised a house had not thought to offer her a ride. The papers came on Thursday. Certified mail, signed for by Russell's shaking hand. Not a brochure this time, a petition. Dale had filed to have his parents declared unable to manage their own affairs, with himself named to manage them instead. A second envelope came from a realtor. Inside was a lockbox key and a date for photographs. 6 weeks. That was how long they had before a sign went up in the yard. Maribel sat at the kitchen table where she had balanced 40 years of accounts, and she read every page twice, slowly, the way she read everything. She was not crying. Russell kept watching her as though he expected her to. "Mibby," he said at last, "say something." She was 73 years old. She had raised 3 children in this house and nursed Russell's mother through her last winter in it. She had carried this family for 40 years, and it had handed her a brochure and a deadline. She closed the folder. She looked up the hall toward the locked room she kept ready for a guest she had never named. Then she looked at the green tin on the shelf. "They want to know if we can still take care of ourselves," she said. "That isn't the question that matters." Russell waited. "I want to know which of my children would open the door to a stranger in the cold," she said, "because I already know which of them won't open it to me." She stood, reached up, and took down the dented tin and set it on the table between them. She did not open it, not yet. "Get your old work coat," she told him, "the one with the holes in the elbows. Tomorrow you and I are going to find out who in this family still answers the door." The disguise was easier to find than she had feared. Russell's old mill coat still hung in the back of the hall closet. The canvas gone soft and pale, the elbows worn clean through to the lining. He had kept it for the same reason she kept everything, because throwing a thing away felt like lying about the years it had carried you through. For herself, Maribel climbed to the attic and came down with a bundle of clothes meant for the church donation box years ago and never delivered. A man's flannel 3 sizes too big, a wool hat that smelled of cedar and dust, a scarf she could wind up over her chin until only her eyes showed. She stood at the hall mirror and watched herself disappear. The seamstress in her knew exactly what to do. She frayed a cuff with her thumbnail, smudged a little ash from the wood stove along one sleeve, let her shoulders round, forward the way a body rounds when it has slept somewhere with no heat. She took the pins from her hair and let it hang loose and gray. When she was finished, the woman in the glass was not Maribel Ackerman of Ohio Street, the one with the porch light that never went off. She was nobody. She was the kind of nobody people step around on the sidewalk and feel briefly, comfortably sad about, and then forget before the next corner. "I don't like this, Mibby," Russell said behind her. He had the coat on already, his big hands buried in the torn pockets. All this pretending. It feels like a lie. "It isn't a lie," she said. She reached up and turned his frayed collar down flat, the way she had been turning it down for half a century. It's asking a question without warning them it's being asked. That's the only honest way left to ask it. If we knock as ourselves, they'll perform for us. I've watched them perform for 40 years, Russell. I want to see what's underneath just once, when they think nobody who matters is at the door. He looked at her a long moment. Then he held the door for her, the way he always had, and they stepped out into the cold. They took the city bus, the number 11, because two people dressed the way they were dressed could not very well step down out of Russell's pickup truck in front of a white Colonial and expect anyone to believe them. The irony was not lost on Maribel as she counted out the fare in coins. 3 weeks ago, her daughter-in-law had ridden this same line home from a birthday party because nobody at the table had thought to offer her a seat in a warm car. Now Maribel rode it in a dead woman's flannel, watching her own city slide past the smeared window. Bangor changed as they went. Ohio Street and its row of tired porches gave way to the bridge over the Kenduskag, the dark water moving slow and patient underneath, the way it had moved since before the mills. Then the far side rose up, and the streets got wider, and the lawns got deeper, and the honest yellow porch lights turned into the soft white uplighting of houses built to be admired from the road. 40 years and 3 miles of river. That, Maribel thought, was the whole distance her oldest son had traveled to become a man who could stand at her birthday table and call her home an asset. Dale's house sat at the mouth of a cul-de-sac off Broadway, white with black shutters and a wreath on the door, though Christmas was 2 months gone. Every window burned with light. There were cars in the wide driveway she knew on sight, Sharon's little sedan, Brenda's SUV with the dealer frame still on the plate. They were all there, gathered, the 3 of them and whoever else. Some small, tired part of her had hoped they would be, and hated itself for hoping. Above the front door, a little camera blinked its steady red eye into the dark. They had them over every door now, those small, watchful things, studying the night for anything that did not belong. Maribel looked up at it as she climbed the steps on Russell's arm, and something in her took note, the way she took note of everything. The camera was watching too. The camera would not lie about tonight, whatever the people behind the door decided to do. She knocked. 3 soft knuckles on expensive wood. The porch light snapped on, bright and sudden. The door opened the width of a chain, and there was her son's face, the face she had washed and fed and worried over for 43 years, looking out at 2 strangers in the cold, with no flicker of knowing in it at all. "Help you?" Dale said. Not unkind yet, just closed. Maribel made her voice low and rough, an old woman's voice with the gravel of a hard road in it. "Evening. We got turned around, my husband and me. It's a bitter night. We only wondered if you had something hot, a coffee, anything warm. We'd be grateful." For a moment, something moved behind Dale's eyes. Not recognition, calculation. She watched her son measure 2 cold people against the warmth at his back and find them costing too much. "This is private property," he said. "There's a shelter downtown on Main. They do meals." "Please," Russell said quietly. "She's not well in the cold." From inside came Brenda's voice, sharp and carrying. "Dale? Who is it? Shut the door, you're letting the heat out." "Nobody," Dale called back over his shoulder. "Just some homeless folks. I'm handling it. Nobody." Maribel had heard her son use that word twice now in 3 weeks, both times about a person standing right in front of him. He turned back to them and his voice dropped, and for one strange second, the mask slipped, and she saw something raw underneath it, something cornered. "Look," he said, low and fast, "I've got my own problems right now. You have no idea what kind. I can't be feeding the whole street. I'm sorry." He was not sorry, but he believed in the way men believe the things that let them sleep, that he was a man being asked to give what he no longer had. Move along now, before it gets later. The door closed. The chain had never come off it. Through the sidelight glass, Maribel saw them, blurred and golden, her family gathered in her son's warm kitchen. She saw Sharon lift a glass. She heard, faint through the wood, the easy rise and fall of their laughter resuming, the small machinery of an evening she was not part of, closing smoothly back over the gap where two strangers had briefly stood. Russell's jaw was working. "Mibby," he said, "let's go home." "Not yet," she said. She slid her cold hand into her coat pocket, and her fingers closed around the brass key on its frayed blue ribbon. The key that fit no lock she owned, the one she carried the way some people carry a medal without knowing for what. It steadied her. "There's one more door." The bus carried them back across the river and let them off 6 blocks from where the good lawns ended. Wade and Priya lived in the bottom half of a narrow 2-family on a street where the cars were older and the porch boards gave a little underfoot. Wade was 3 states south with a truck full of lumber. The upstairs windows were dark. Only the kitchen at the back glowed, one small square of yellow against all that cold. There was a camera here, too, Maribel saw, a cheap one clipped crooked above the door, the kind a woman buys for herself when her husband is away and the nights are long. She was almost glad of it. Russell knocked. The footsteps came quick, then paused. A mother's pause, weighing the dark on the other side of her own door, with 2 children asleep above her head. Then the chain slid back, all the way back, and the door opened wide, and there was Priya in a worn cardigan with a dish towel over her shoulder and flour on her wrist, looking out at 2 freezing strangers with the only expression that had been missing from every other doorway that night. Concern, plain, immediate concern, with not one thread of calculation in it. "Oh," Priya said softly. "Oh, you must be frozen. Come in out of it. Come in, please, the step's icy." She did not ask who they were. She did not ask what they wanted, or where they were from, or whether they deserved it. She put her hand under Maribel's elbow and drew her over the threshold into the warmth, as though that were simply what a door was for. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and a kettle just off the boil. There was a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator and a single place setting, drying by the sink. The small economy of a woman feeding herself alone after the children were down. "Sit, sit," Priya said, pulling out 2 chairs. "I've got soup on. It's nothing fancy, lentils, but it's hot. And there's bread." She was already ladling it, already cutting thick slices, already pouring tea without being asked. She draped a blanket from the back of the couch over Maribel's shoulders. She went into the hall and came back with a man's heavy work coat, Wade's coat, and pressed it into Russell's hands. "Take it. He's away, he won't miss it, and you've a long way to go in this." Maribel kept her face down over the bowl and ate, and could not have said in that moment whether the warmth in her chest was the soup or the breaking of her own heart. "You remind me of someone," Priya said suddenly, tilting her head, studying Maribel's hands where they curved around the cup. Maribel went still. Then Priya smiled and shook it off, the way you shake off a word on the tip of your tongue. "I don't know. It doesn't matter. Everybody reminds me of somebody these days." She sat down across from them, this girl her family had frozen out for 10 winters, and folded her flour-dusted hands on the table. "My own people are very far from here," she said quietly. "Oceans far. When I first came to this country, I knocked on a lot of doors, and I learned fast which kind open and which kind only have a light on for show." She glanced toward the window, toward the cold city. "So, you knock on mine anytime. It opens." In the locked-back bedroom on Ohio Street, there was a shoebox of letters, and in every one of them, an old woman who had once called Maribel not our kind had written the same strange line in a hand that shook more each season. "Kindness answers the door." Maribel had thought for years it was just a saying, the kind the old keep like worn coins in a pocket. Sitting now in her youngest son's kitchen, wrapped in a stranger's blanket, watching the one person her family had shut out ladle soup for 2 people she had every reason to turn away, Maribel understood for the first time that Greta had not been speaking in sayings at all. She had been leaving instructions. They did not stay long. Maribel could not have borne much more of it without giving herself away, and the giving away was not hers to do yet. At the door, Priya pressed a folded 20 into Russell's coat pocket. Money Maribel knew the girl did not have to spare and would not hear a word against it. "For the bus," Priya said, "and there's more soup if you pass back this way." They walked to the corner under the cold, clean stars, and Russell finally let out the breath he seemed to have been holding all night. "Well," he said, "now you know." "Now I know," Maribel agreed. But knowing she had learned across 40 years of balancing other people's accounts was only ever half the work. The other half was proving it, in ink, in a hand no one could argue with. The cabinet beside the stove held 40 years of little spiral notebooks, one for every year, the books her children laughed about, and tucked in the back in a separate stack bound with a rubber band gone brittle were the older ones, Greta's books. The ledgers the old woman had kept before her in the same careful column and date hand she had taught Maribel at this very table, back when they could barely stand to share a room. That night, while Russell slept, Maribel sat down under the kitchen lamp, slid the rubber band free, and began to read her dead mother-in-law's accounts, line by line. It took her until the hour the birds start, and somewhere in the winter of a year long past, in Greta's shaking column of figures, Maribel found a payment she could not explain, a sum, modest and exact, going out every single month to a name she had never heard in her life. Year after year after year, faithful as a heartbeat. And then, the month Maribel's own children had gathered to push her out, the month the disowning began, the payments simply stopped. She sat very still in the yellow light, the old notebook open in her hands, and asked the empty kitchen the question that would carry her into everything that came next. Who had Greta been paying all those years? And why had it ended the very moment this family decided one of its own no longer counted? She did not sleep that night, and she did not pretend to. The name sat in Greta's old ledger like a stone she could feel through the sole of her shoe. N. Pelletier. A small sum going out the first of every month, faithful as the moon comes around year upon year. And then, in a single winter, nothing. Maribel ran her thumb down the brittle column under the kitchen lamp until the figures swam, and the longer she looked, the less the silence after them made any sense. People did not simply stop being paid for no reason. In 40 years of keeping books at this table, she had learned one thing past all argument, that money tells the truth even when the mouths around it are lying. A payment that begins tells you a heart has opened. A payment that ends tells you something has closed. The only question worth asking was what had shut and who had shut it. By the gray hour when the plows came scraping down Ohio Street, she had her own notebooks down off the cabinet too, the whole tower of them, 40 little spiral books her children loved to laugh about at holidays, the ones Dale called her useless scribbling. She set Greta's careful hand beside her own and read The House on Ohio Street the way you read one long sentence written by two women across half a century. Taxes paid, the roof and the bad year, the furnace, the small loan taken to fix the porch and paid back in full, on time, every penny accounted. It was all there, honest as bread. And then, threading underneath it like a crack you only see when the light comes sideways, she found the other story. A second mortgage she had never signed. Papers drawn 3 years back when Dale had come around so warm and helpful, saying he only wanted to put the deed in a family trust to protect them from the tax man, saying, "Just sign here, Ma. It's only paperwork. You wouldn't understand the half of it." She had signed because you signed for your son. And the money pulled out against the house she had lived in for 40 years had not gone to any roof or any furnace. It had gone across the river. It had gone to a white colonial off Broadway with black shutters and a wreath up 2 months past Christmas, to cover a debt that had been quietly eating that fine house from the inside while everyone admired it from the road. Her son had been bleeding her home to keep his own afloat. The brochure on her birthday cake had never been about her comfort at all. It had been a man reaching for the last dry thing left to throw on a fire only he could see. She closed the books. She did not weep, because weeping was a thing you did when you were surprised, and she found she was not surprised, only tired in a place sleep does not reach. But the name was still there, N. Pelletier. Greta's own private account, nothing to do with Dale, nothing to do with the house. Money, the old woman had moved out into the dark for years and told no one. Maribel had balanced every account in this family but that one, and it had stopped the same month they pushed her out. She put on her good coat over the church box flannel she had not yet returned to the attic, slid the brass key on its frayed blue ribbon into her pocket, the way another woman might pocket a rosary, and walked down to the parish. Father Lindqvist had married them in that church when Maribel was a bride. Nobody on Russell's side wanted. The outsider girl, the not our kind. Now he was an old man himself, and he ran the food pantry out of the church basement on Hammond, 3 long tables and a coffee urn, and a line of folks who came in stamping the cold off their boots. He did not look up from the cans he was stacking when she sat down across from him. He just slid her a paper cup of bad coffee and waited, the way priests learn to wait. "I have a name I cannot place," she said. She set Greta's ledger on the table between them and turned it to face him. "My mother-in-law was paying it for years. Then she died, and somehow the payments kept on without her, and then they quit. The very month my children decided I had stopped being their mother. I have balanced this whole family's books, Father. I cannot balance this one line." He looked at the page a long while. Then he looked at her, and there was something in his face that was not pity, which she was grateful for, because she had grown to hate pity. "You want me to tell you who's lying," he said. "I want you to tell me what I'm looking at. You taught half this town to balance a book, Maribel. You sat in the back of this very basement and showed widows how to read a bill collector." He pushed the ledger back toward her gently. "You already know who's lying. You've known since the cake. What you came here to find out is whether anybody in this family ever told the truth." "So?" He nodded at the name. "That one did. That one's the truest line in the book. You know it. I know her. She's been carrying soup to that table by the window for 6 years." He tipped his head toward the far end of the basement, where a young woman in nurse's scrubs under an open coat was crouched down to the level of an old man's chair, listening to him with her whole body the way only certain people ever learn to listen. Nora Pelletier. Came up hard this side of the river, no people to speak of. Used to come through this line as a girl holding her own mother's hand. He smiled to himself. Then one winter, a sharp old woman in a good wool coat started sitting in that chair every Tuesday watching her. Greta, your Greta, asked me one day, very quiet, what it would cost to put a girl like that through her nursing courses. I told her. Next week, the money came. Every month after, the same. Never a word, never her name on it. The girl always thought it was the diocese. He let that settle. It was your mother-in-law paying for a stranger's child to learn to care for strangers. For years. Maribel sat very still and watched Nora Pelletier hold an old man's hand in the church basement and felt the whole shape of Greta turn over in the dark of her, like a coat she had been wearing inside out her entire life. "It stopped," Maribel said. "Why did it stop? Because the girl finished." Father Lindqvist spread his hands, got her license that spring. Greta paid her exactly to the door of the thing, and not 1 month past it, because Greta never gave charity. Maribel. Charity is for people who want to feel warm. Greta gave passage. She got that girl to the door, and then she made her walk through it on her own feet. He paused. There was a note. "In the back of one of those books, if it's the set, I think it is, Greta showed me once, near the end, when her hands were going. Said it was instructions, not a saying. You'd know it when you needed it." "Kindness answers the door," Maribel said. The old priest's eyes went bright and far away. She made me read it back to her 3 times so she'd know I had it right. Then she said, "When the day comes that this family finally needs the door themselves, watch who opens it." "That's the whole estate, Father," she told me. "The rest is just a house." Maribel found the note that evening, tucked in the backboard of Greta's last ledger where the rubber band had hidden it for years. The hand was barely a hand by then, just the ghost of those careful columns. She is qualified now. The door is hers to keep. When the time comes, see the box. And below it, underlined twice so hard the old pen had torn the paper. The line that was not a saying, "Kindness answers the door." She did not go to the box, not yet. There was one more door she had to knock on first, and this one she knocked on as herself. Ada Sorensen lived 4 houses down Ohio Street. A widow, now past 90, in a narrow house with a wheelchair ramp Russell had built her one fall for nothing. She had her tea ready before Maribel got her coat off, the way the very old do, having learned that company is a thing you hold on to with both hands. "I wondered when you'd come," Ada said when Maribel finally laid it out. The payments and the note and the word box. The old woman's cup did not so much as tremble. "Sit down, dear. I've been keeping a secret for a dead woman for 11 years, and I'm too old now to take it any further than this kitchen." She told it plain. How the bank had nearly put her out of this house the winter after her Carl passed, how the notice had come, how she had sat at this table with her coat already on, waiting for the men, and how Greta Ackerman, of all the cold, proud women in Bangor, had walked in without knocking, read the notice, and made it disappear. Not with a gift, with a trust. Greta had put a thing in motion, Ada said, a careful legal thing, drawn up by a lawyer downtown, that took the old house at the other end of the street, the Ackerman house, Maribel's house, and wrapped it in a promise no son could unwrap. She told me the words herself, sitting right where you're sitting. Ada Sorensen set down her cup. She said, "Ada, I spent my best years deciding who was our kind and who wasn't, and I was wrong about every soul I ever turned from my door. Starting with the girl my boy married. So I've fixed it where it can't be unfixed by people like the one I used to be. That house goes to whoever opens the door to a stranger out in the cold. Not the cleverest, not the eldest, not the one who stayed for show, the one who opens the door." The old woman reached over and put her papery hand on Maribel's. "And she made you the keeper of it, dear. She said the books had finally gone to the only honest accountant the family ever produced. She meant you. It's all sitting in that ugly tin she left you. She told me you'd be too stubborn to look until you'd suffered enough to need it." Maribel walked the 4 houses home in the dark with the maples bare over Ohio Street and the river moving slow and patient beyond them. And she let herself into her own kitchen, and she stood a long time looking at the dented green tin on the shelf. The recipe box no one in this family had ever been allowed to touch, the one her children rolled their eyes at, the one she had guarded for 11 years without fully knowing why. She took it down. She set it on the table under the lamp. She lifted the lid, and the smell of old vanilla and pencil shavings came up at her, and there on top were the index cards in Greta's hand, the bread, the brown stew, the cake that had been on the table the night her son slid a brochure across it. She lifted the cards out one by one and laid them aside like a woman dealing a slow hand of cards. And underneath, flat against the bottom of the tin, was a folded packet of heavy paper gone soft at the creases. The deed to the house on Ohio Street, and clipped behind it the trust, the lawyer's seal still crisp, and the clause typed plain in the middle of the page, where any fool could read it and only the right one ever would. To be awarded, upon the keeper's word, to whoever opens the door to a stranger at the door. Maribel sat down slowly with the deed in her 2 hands. Down the hall, the locked back bedroom waited, dusted and made up and warm, the bed turned down for a guest she had kept ready for years without letting herself say the name. She knew the name now. She had watched her ladle lentil soup for 2 freezing strangers and drape a blanket over a stranger's shoulders and press a folded 20 she could not spare into an old man's coat. She closed the tin over the empty space where the deed had been, and she set the brass key on its frayed ribbon on top of the lid, and she reached for the telephone to invite her whole family to tea. They came on a Sunday, the way they always came when there was something to divide, in their good coats and their careful faces, parking the cars nose to tail down Ohio Street until the curb in front of the narrow house was full of them. Maribel had the kettle on before the first knock. She did not hurry to answer it. She let Russell open the door, and she stood at the stove in her good gray dress with her hair pinned the way Greta used to pin hers. And she listened to her children fill the front room with the bright, false warmth of people who are certain they have already won. Dale came in last, the way a man walks into a room he believes he owns, the brochure folder under his arm again, and beside him a stranger in a press suit who turned out to be the sort of man you bring along when you mean to put a pen in an old woman's hand. Maribel saw him and she smiled, and she got down one more cup. She served them herself. She would not let a soul help. She carried the tray in with the good china that had come down from Greta, and she poured for each of them in turn, the cruel ones and the quiet ones alike. And she set the sugar where Dale could reach it because he had always taken 3. They thought it was surrender. You could watch it move across their faces like sun crossing a floor, the ease of it, the relief. The old woman has finally seen sense. The old woman is pouring the tea. Priya sat at the far end by the cold window, in the chair nobody ever fought for, the chair this family had kept for her for 10 years. Her hands folded in her lap and her cup untouched, and she alone watched Maribel's face instead of Maribel's hands, and something in her went very still. When every cup was full, Maribel did not sit. She crossed to the cabinet by the stove and took down the whole tower of little spiral notebooks, 40 years of them, and set them among the teacups with a soft thud that closed the room like a hand. "You have all had a great deal to say about my notebooks," she said. Her voice stayed low. She did not lift it. "Dale, you called them my scribbling. I thought tonight we might read a little of the scribbling out loud." She opened the books to the pages she had marked with torn strips of grocery receipt, and she read them the house the way she had read bills to widows in a church basement for 30 years, not as an accusation, only as columns. The taxes, paid. The furnace, paid. The porch loan, paid back to the penny. And then the second loan, the one she had never put her own hand to, the papers Dale had brought her 3 winters back warm as soup, telling her it was only a little family trust to keep the taxman off, telling her to sign by the small flag and not trouble her head with the rest. She read them the number that had gone out against this house. She read them where it had gone, across the Kenduskeag, off Broadway, into the fine white colonial with the black shutters, into a hole that had been swallowing that house from the inside, while the whole family stood at the curb admiring its lawn. The room had gone the particular quiet of people doing arithmetic they do not like. Dale set his cup down. "Mother," he began, in the voice he kept for clients. "You borrowed against your home twice," Maribel said, not lifting her eyes from the page. "You are weeks from losing it. You needed mine to fill the hole, and you could not wait for me to be gone, so you decided I was not competent instead." She turned a page. "It is all here. It was always here. You only believed that no one was keeping the books." Dale's face did the thing she had spent 40 years hoping it would never learn to do. It hardened. "I am the one who stayed," he said. "Every Sunday, every birthday, every hospital chair. Where were the rest of you? Where was she?" And he did not even turn his head. He moved his chin half an inch toward the cold end of the table, toward Priya, the one who married in for the address. "I held this family upright. I am owed." "Yes," Maribel said softly. "You kept showing up. Now let us talk about who actually opened the door." She reached behind her to the shelf and brought down the dented green recipe tin, the one no child of hers had ever been allowed to open, the one they had rolled their eyes at every Christmas of their lives, and she set it in the center of the table where the brochure folder had lain so confidently an hour before. The lid came off with the small tin sigh it had made all her married life. And then, slowly, with every face turned toward her, she lifted the recipe cards out one at a time and laid them in a row down the cloth. Greta's bread, the brown stew, the cake. each card in the dead woman's careful hand, set down one by one like witnesses taking the stand. Beneath the last of them, flat against the bottom, lay the folded packet of heavy paper, and when Maribel drew it out, the man in the press suit leaned forward before he could stop himself, because a man in that trade knows the shape of a legal instrument from across a room. "This is from your grandmother," Maribel said to the table, unfolding the first sheet, Greta's letter in the spidery late hand. Greta. The one you remember as a hard woman. She was. She was harder to me, and for longer than to anyone in this room. She read them a single line of it, the line that carried the rest. That before the end, Greta had taken the house on Ohio Street, the very house Dale meant to sell out from under his parents, and wrapped it in a trust no son's pen could open, drawn and sealed by a lawyer downtown years ago, and had named one keeper to carry out its one instruction. "She named me," Maribel said. "The keeper is me." She turned to the second sheet, the trust itself, the seal still crisp, and she read them the clause set plain in the middle of the page, the meaning Greta had hidden inside 40 years of letters they had all dismissed as an old woman's needlework. The house and every debt hung against it was to pass whole and free to one person and no other. Not the eldest, not the cleverest, not the one who came for the photographs. It would pass to whoever, on one cold night, had answered the knock of a stranger left out in the dark and let them in. You may already see the shape of it sitting where you sit. The people at that table did not even Dale, who was still working numbers in his head, as though numbers had ever once opened a door for anybody. So Maribel told them about the night. She was a woman who kept records of everything, and she had not let that night go unrecorded either. She told them how she and Russell had taken rags from the church box and dirtied their good faces and gone out into the November cold, two old people no one in Bangor would look at twice, and how they had stood on the porches of their own children, one after another, and knocked. And she told them how the porch lights had stayed dark, how at one house a curtain had moved and then gone still, how at Dale's handsome door across the stream they had stood until the cold came up through the soles of their shoes, and no one had come, though every window was lit and they could hear the television going inside. And then she looked down the long table to the cold end, to the chair nobody had ever wanted, and she laid Russell's photograph on the cloth and slid it toward the middle so the whole table could see. Two filthy strangers on a lit porch, the door wide. And in the doorway, a blanket already in her arms, a young woman who had not asked who they were or what they wanted, who had only seen two people shaking in the dark and stepped back to make room. "Priya opened the door," Maribel said. "Priya, whom you seat by the window, Priya, whom you have spent 10 years teaching to feel like a guest at her own family's table. She made us soup. She put us by her fire. She emptied her own coat pocket into your father's hand. And she never once asked our names." Priya had gone white. "I did not know it was you," she said, very low. "I would have, it was not because I did not help so that," and she stopped, because there was no end to that sentence that did not turn kindness into an excuse, and she had never in her life been made to apologize for it before. "I know," Maribel said gently. "That is the whole of you. You did not know. You never know. You only open it." Dale was on his feet. The man in the suit had a hand on his sleeve, and Dale shook it off. "That clause," he said, and the crack was in his voice now, the foreclosure in it. "If there is a trust, then there is a process, there is standing, the family has a claim, I have a claim. You cannot simply," and he heard himself, and he stopped, but it was already done. He had reached for the rules. He had always loved the rules, so long as he believed they belonged to him. Maribel looked at her eldest son a long moment, and she did not raise her voice, because the quietest thing in a room is the thing every person in it finally leans in to hear. "You wanted the rules followed, Dale. So did your grandmother." And she took up the folded deed to the house on Ohio Street, and she walked the length of the table, past every child who had voted her out of her own life, and she set it down at the cold end by the window, and she slid it under Priya's untouched cup. The faction came apart, of course. Words like contest and undue influence and the oldest wound of all said right out into the open, she is not even really one of us. Maribel let it run until it tired itself, the way you let a kettle climb and finish. She let none of it move her face. She only waited, hands folded, until they remembered she was still standing. "You may come to this house," she said at last, to all of them. "You were never barred from this house. That was never the thing you lost. You may sit at this table on Sundays for as long as I am above the ground to pour, but you will sit at it the way Priya has sat at it for 10 years, at the end, quietly, grateful to be let in at all. And in a few years, if you have learned how that feels, perhaps we will speak about moving your chairs up." She set the teapot down. "That is the whole of the inheritance left for the rest of you. I would not slide it across a cake if I were you." The lawyer downtown who had drawn Greta's trust did not need to be asked twice. Within the month, the papers were moving, quiet and exact as Greta herself, a filing to strike the liens Dale had hung against a house that had never been his to borrow against. The sham, little trust unwound thread by thread in a county office. A clerk at the bank on Main pulled a file and flagged it. A letter went out under a letterhead. Somewhere, a loan officer who had stamped a name he ought to have questioned read that letter twice and reached for his telephone. None of it touched Maribel. She had handed the whole of it to people whose work it was and gone back to her kettle. When the house was empty again, when the cars had gone nose to tail back across the stream, and the maples had let down the last of their leaves onto the cold grass, Maribel asked Priya to stay. She made fresh tea, the real kind, for the two of them. Then she took up the brass house key on its ribbon gone pale and soft, the one she had carried in her coat pocket for 11 years, worn smooth as a creek stone. They had all thought it was sentiment, an old woman's habit, a key to nothing. "I am not giving you a house," Maribel said, folding the girl's fingers shut around it. "Greta did not give me one either. She gave me a job." She held Priya's hand closed around the warm brass a moment longer. "You are the keeper now. When I am gone, the house does not pass to the cleverest child you raise or the one who visits most. It passes the way it came to you. You watch your own door. You give it to whoever opens theirs to a stranger out in the cold, and you teach the one who comes after you to do the very same. That is all it has ever been. A door, and the next person honest enough to open it." Priya could not speak. She nodded, and she gripped the key until her knuckles paled, and the two women this family had spent so long trying to keep at the window sat together at the center of the table at last. That night, Maribel walked down the hall to the back bedroom, the one she had kept locked and dusted and aired and turned down all these years for a guest she could never quite let herself name. She fit the small key, turned the lock, and pushed the door wide. The room was warm. The bed was made. She switched on the lamp, and then she crossed and drew the curtains back, and then she lifted the window itself, so the light fell out across the side yard and down the slope toward Ohio Street, where anyone walking cold in the dark could see which house was burning and know to come to it. Priya's children would sleep here at Christmas. After them, she did not need to know. She left the door open to the hall and the lamp burning toward Ohio Street. The door stays open now.